Hello viewers, welcome to Canada-Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. On this platform, we talk about issues that impact the social justice locally and globally. We try to build a conversation around the scholars of the world to build a global solidarity so that we can actually use this conversation to promote the rights of some of the most marginalized groups to have meaningful conversation. Today, we have with us Professor Noam Chomsky, who does not need any introduction. I am equally excited and at the same time nervous to have this conversation. Our conversations will mostly center around the issues of Bangladesh. I have, quite a few questions, and they mostly center around Bangladesh, but also issues, that impact the whole world. So the conversation that we're starting on is that neoliberalism and its impact on countries like Bangladesh. So I'll first say, Professor Chomsky, thank you very much, taking some time to have this conversation with us.
Be very pleased to be with you. It's a privilege.
Thank you, Professor. The first question that I have for you is that Bangladesh is a victim of neoliberal violence when it comes on the front of climate injustice. Millions of people are infected by climate injustice in Bangladesh, but you don't see the reports in Western media. Natural disasters have displaced Bangladesh, by millions. Every day in Bangladesh, about 50 children drown and die. We are not responsible for this. But we are the victims of this climate injustice. How do you view this, and what do you have to say to people in Bangladesh and also to people in America?
Well, the environmental minister for Bangladesh some years ago pointed out that Bangladesh is the victim of, first of all, the neoliberal assault, but then an assault going back hundreds of years when the British, Robert Clive, arrived in East Bengal in the 18th century. It was the richest part of the world. When he got to Dhaka, he couldn't believe the wealth and opulence of cultural and material richness of the place where he had arrived. England was far behind. In fact, India and China at that time were the centers of commerce, manufacturing, general culture, and so on. The other area, when there's another area that was similar to, namely, the island of what is now Haiti and Hispaniola. When Columbus arrived there, the wealth of the island just astonished them, and it became France's richest colony, source of maybe 20% of France's wealth. Well, those two places are interesting because after a couple of hundred years, they became the very symbols of despair and hopelessness, which is a dramatic illustration of the effects of colonialism. Now, it's become much worse in recent years because of the neoliberal attack on general populations has hit Bangladesh particularly hard. So to go back to the environmental minister, he said, look, you have done this to us. Now you have the responsibility to you can't compensate for your crimes, but at least you can absorb the populations which will have to flee from the results of the devastation you have caused. Well, unfortunately, the chances of that happening are not high given the moral level of the rich countries, but the principle is correct. At the very least, a major effort should be made to assist Bangladesh in trying to deal with the crises that are coming. That in general, quite apart from Bangladesh, for the entire world, unless much more serious efforts are taken to deal with the impending environmental catastrophe. All of human organized society will not be able to survive. But assuming that those steps are taken, there are measures that could be used to protect Bangladesh from the worst impacts of the environmental crisis. And that will mean substantial funding from the West, which is morally justified and economically quite possible. But it will take a major struggle within the West to achieve the moral revolution which is required to face the consequences of Western colonialism, which has been extraordinarily destructive all over the world, and to try to compensate for it somehow. I mean, take the Western Hemisphere. Virtually the entire population was exterminated. That's about 80 million people. That's, nobody knows how many, but most were simply exterminated. Africa was devastated. Africa could have moved on, and this continues right till the present. And what Europe and the United States are doing is refusing even to accept refugees who are fleeing in desperation from the consequences of recent Western actions. The Pope Francis pointed out that the so-called refugee crisis is in fact a moral crisis for the West. And that's the same is true in South Asia. Till the into the 18th century, England was robbing higher technology from what was then India, basically South Asia, and using it for British industrial development. Then England proceeded essentially to deindustrialize South Asia. When it, barely, finally only achieved a limited degree of independence after the Second World War, after horrifying famines, tens of millions of people died, none of it necessary. There's a debt that the West holds to almost the entire inhabited world. And it is a moral crisis that'll have to be overcome alongside of the direct crisis of acting decisively to mitigate. Sorry about that. It's one of the problems of working at home. To mitigate and reverse the environmental crisis that is not just creeping up on us, but is already visible. If it's not controlled within the next 1 or 2 decades, it'll be irreversible. So humans are at a point of human history which has never existed before. The current generation will have to determine whether human life on Earth can persist in any recognizable form. Large areas of the world are simply going to become uninhabitable on its present course. Let's take South Asia. The temperatures are already rising to 50 degrees Celsius in areas where people don't have air conditioning to retreat to and won't. Water supplies are seriously endangered. India, hundreds of thousands of people already don't have potable water. As the glaciers melt, the rivers decline, the countries will be facing the increasing drought. The monsoon is irregular, cyclones, extreme weather events. Even drinkable water won't be available. And we have two nuclear-armed states in South Asia. Another one just north, China, is going to face its own environmental problems, very serious. That's three nuclear-armed states, which will be competing for diminishing resources. The consequences are unimaginable. So they're very serious questions coming. There are answers to them. Fortunately, we have another decade or two in which we can deal with these crises, but there isn't any time to waste.
Yeah, in regarding to the time that you mentioned in terms of like, and thank you very much, like, actually bringing in the British colonial domination and exploitation and recognizing the fact that Bangladesh was the richest part in the country, because particularly we having the colonial legacy and the kind of education that we go through, it's very, the discourses are very colonially produced. We read, we grew up reading that Columbus was a great man. If we are fortunate, go on studying social science later in life, we realize the truth when you read, by scholars like Howard Zinn. Well, the Nobel laureate economist of Bangladesh, Professor Yunus, has said from 2020 to 2030, the decade of last chance. Now, I'm going to place this in terms of climate crisis and refugee crisis in Bangladesh. That when I see people like Greta Thunberg going to United Nations and holding the state leaders of the world responsible for the devastation, I feel hopeful. But at the same time, help asking this question is that will the world give equal importance to the girls of Bangladesh? According to 2019 UN UNESCO report, about 20 million children in Bangladesh are living under great risk because of this climate crisis, that they're not responsible. In the first quarter of 2019, about 1.9 million people got displaced. And part of the country that I'm from, I just have come to Canada, I'm still in my quarantine. I'll give you a picture is that, next to my village, next to the part of the country where I live, there is a district called Shirazganj, where, a village disappeared in front of the people to the river. And particularly one scene where the masjid is like disappearing to the river. And you can imagine that how people hold a praying place so important, in such desperate situation. 1/3 of the country is underwater. When will the world listen to the girls of Bangladesh who are directly impacted by it? And how is this world stage distributed for hearing voices?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Could you repeat the last part?
Yeah, so when do you think the world is ready to hear the experiences of Bangladeshi girls, like who are displaced by climate crisis, like they listen to Greta Thunberg?
Well, there are ways to deal with the crisis. That's the important part. Bangladesh, for example, if the world faces the problems globally, then locally in Bangladesh, there are possible measures to hold back the rising sea, for example, the way it's done in richer countries. Take Netherlands, take Boston, where I lived most of my life. Much of Boston is technically underwater, but the city survives because means are available to compensate for that with modern engineering practices and so on. That could be done in Bangladesh, but it's important to remember that the local solution in Bangladesh, well, things can be done, doesn't mean anything if the world isn't addressing the general crises. And there are basically two. One of them is terminating the use of fossil fuels, moving to net zero emissions, developing alternatives. That's all very feasible. The other is the moral crisis. That's not a material crisis of bringing the West, raising the West to the level of civilization in which it will recognize its need to take significant measures to compensate and overcome the disasters it has created for hundreds of years. That's hard. And you can see it happening in case after case. So right now, for example, the United Nations has a biodiversity conference. There's very severe attacks around the globe simply on the existence of species. They're disappearing at a rate that hasn't happened for 65 million years. A recent study from the leading botanical research center, Kew Gardens in London, found that 40% of plant species are disappearing. Insect species are rapidly disappearing, mammals as well. This is a very severe crisis. And over 160 countries are meeting to try to consider ways to overcome the crisis. One is missing. The most powerful country in human history is refusing to attend. It will not undertake the moves towards internationalism that are necessary to overcome global crises. It's not the first time. There's an international consortium, COVAX it's called, which is working on trying to deal with the pandemic. Pandemic, of course, is a global crisis, just as destruction of habitat is. It's the countries, just about every country is working on trying to find ways to cooperate to develop vaccines. Obviously, cooperation and free interchange is the most effective way. They're also trying to deal with distributional problems. How do we ensure that if vaccines are developed, they won't be monopolized by the rich? Not only by the rich countries, but by the rich in the rich countries. How do we deal with that? One country is missing. The Trump administration pulled out of the agreement, refused to participate. And the reason they gave is that the World Health Organization is participating and that the United States wants to destroy the World Health Organization on completely frivolous grounds. This has to do with Trump's electoral prospects. He has to find a scapegoat for the fact that he's killed hundreds of thousands of Americans through this colossal failure to deal with the pandemic. And his government has now conceded that they can't do anything at all. It's just going to rage. You can't accept the blame for that. So you have to blame someone else. All right, let's blame the World Health Organization and defund them and destroy them and destroy the COVAX conference. Nobody can estimate how many people are going to be killed by these actions. Poor people in Africa, in Yemen, other places, rely on the services of the World Health Organization for survival from many diseases. But when you have a psychopathic autocrat running the most powerful state in history, the world is in serious trouble. And November 3rd, the election day, that will actually be decisive in determining whether the world has much hope in overcoming the crises that it faces, of which we've only mentioned a few. There are others. We're in a unique moment of human history when there is a confluence of crises all at once, all of them severe. The threat of destroying the environment, destroying biodiversity, pandemic, serious threat of nuclear war, the threat of severe deterioration of democracy, seeing it right next door in India, one of the worst places where Prime Minister Modi is simply dismantling the secular democratic system of the largest democracy in the world and turning it into a Hindu nationalist ethnocracy, crushing the hundreds of millions of Muslims, just as is happening in Myanmar. Bangladesh is facing the effects, crushing Kashmir right next door. China has maybe 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, hideous concentration camps. Bangladesh is right at the center of massive crimes against the Muslim population of the world. All of this is another one of the major crises that's taking place. It's an astonishing moment in history. Now, we should bear in mind that there are solutions to every one of these crises, but they're not going to be easy to deal with. And Bangladesh, which has been a victim for hundreds of years, happens to be kind of at the epicenter of an array of crises, which it can't solve on its own, but can do what it can domestically and try to deal with the rest of the surrounding world simply to raise consciousness and understanding, the way the environmental minister did in the statements that he made, which unfortunately didn't get enough attention.
Yeah, and beautiful. You have wonderfully placed it, Professor Chomsky. I have two like following question that comes here based on what you just have stated. One is the climate crisis in Bangladesh is creating a lot of climate refugees. Now, Bangladesh, according to a data, a Norwegian organization that looks at the internally displaced people in the world, after India, the second country that has the highest number of internally displaced people. Now, if I give you two shocking situation here, is that in 2019, about 60 migrants, Bangladeshi migrants, drowned and died when they're trying to cross from Libya to Italy. And we know right now the right-wing rise in European politics, xenophobic, racist attitude towards people. And also in Bangladesh, when we try to cross border, because of rising climate crisis, first we are met with bullet. They don't want to hear that why this person is trying to cross. That is the kind of crisis that we are dealing with. A leading climate scientist in Bangladesh, Professor Atikur Rahman, in an article in New York Times has said is that Bangladeshis should be able to move to America, these climate refugees, because we are not responsible for it. You, as one of the leading public intellectuals of the world, and also being an American, how do you see this statement that Bangladeshis should specifically be able to move into countries like America and European countries, because we didn't do this?
Well, that's basically the statement of the environmental minister that I referred to. In a just world, would obviously be true. I happen to live in Arizona. You can travel for miles and it's empty spaces. Country's undersettled. This is all over the country. There's 300 million people, but a huge country with massive resources unmatched anywhere. Even Central American immigrants fleeing from current US terror are blocked. And under the Trump administration has made it much worse. But it was terrible before. Not far from where I live, half a couple hours driving, children are being isolated in cages, separated from their parents, not given the international legal rights of even to apply for asylum. And the United States is doing what Europe is doing, pushing them away from the borders. It's compelling Mexico to try to stop refugees at the southern Mexican border. Why are they fleeing? Well, in the 1980s, under Ronald Reagan, the United States practically destroyed Central America. It was running terrorist wars, which killed hundreds of thousands of people. It led to maybe 800,000 million widows and orphans, internal refugees, an effort to destroy independence. It left total wreckage. They are also being affected by they are also victims of the climate crisis. Agricultural areas are disappearing. There are areas in Guatemala where there was literal genocide carried out by the government, backed, supported all the way by the United States. This is the Mayan area. People are still fleeing from there to the US border, being turned back, not even permitted to apply for asylum. About the only good thing you can say about it is that Europe is worse. You talked about people dying in the Mediterranean when they're trying to flee to Italy. Well, Italy has a history. It carried out the first major genocide of the 20th century in Libya. Horrifying genocide. Now people are fleeing from Libya. Italy will not permit them to reach its shores. They die in the Mediterranean. In the poor African state of Niger, West Africa, far from the Mediterranean, Europe has set up military bases to try to assist the Niger government in preventing refugees from devastating parts of Africa, even to reach the Mediterranean. I mean, the same is happening with refugees from the Middle East, where the victims are the victims of Western wars, including the US invasion of Iraq, which spread terror throughout the region and incited ethnic confrontations, didn't exist before, now tearing the region apart. Okay, a lot of this is very recent. We don't have to go back to Robert Clive and destroying East Bengal. That was horrible enough. But take the very recent period, maybe the worst atrocities of European imperialism were what the Belgians did in Congo. Congo is the richest area of Africa, one of the richest in the world. Enormous resources, huge country. Belgium was probably killed 10 million people just trying to compel the natives to collect rubber for Belgian industry. King Leopold was the worst monster, but it continued. What happened to the Congo? 1960, it finally achieved independence. It was under the leadership of a young, charismatic, effective leader, the most prominent one in Africa, Patrice Lumumba. It had a chance for the first time to make use of its extraordinary wealth for its own people and for the development of Africa. Could have led the development of Africa. So what happened? The Eisenhower administration ordered the CIA to assassinate him. They failed. Belgium managed to assassinate him first. Then the Western powers Belgium and the United States primarily, imposed a brutal, vicious dictator, Mobutu, who persisted in the atrocities that had been carried out, goes on right to the present moment, right now. In the last couple of years, millions of people have been killed in eastern Congo with militias battling to extract the minerals that are used for your cell phone and for other electronic devices around the world. The multinational corporations are hovering over them, taking the mineral wealth that is being stolen from the Congo with murderous destruction, millions of people being killed. This is after centuries of destruction and exploitation. It's not ancient history. And these are the reasons why people are trying to flee. And Bangladesh is one example. It's a global problem. There's going to be tens, maybe hundreds of millions of people fleeing in the near future unless these global problems are addressed. And one of them is a profound moral problem in the West. Pope Francis was exactly right. Just the environmental minister of Bangladesh was exactly right. These are deep moral, cultural problems in the West. They have to be overcome along with the material problems. Those we know how to deal with. The moral problems are harder. That has to be a change and a rise to a level of civilization that is something new. And unfortunately, the tendencies are in the opposite direction. Here, there's another tragedy that's taking place. The neoliberal assault on the countries of the world has been dramatic in the West as well. What has happened is that over the neoliberal years, the past 40 years, the wealth has radically concentrated, and the general population has been stagnation or decline. Take the United States, the richest, most privileged country in the world. There was just a study carried out a couple of weeks ago by one of the major research institutions, the Rand Corporation. It asked a simple question: how much wealth has been transferred from the lower 90% of the US population to the top during the neoliberal years? The number they estimate is $47 trillion through the neoliberal years. And it's not to the top 10%, it's to a fraction of the 10%. The wealth of 0.1%, not 1%, 0.1% of the population has doubled since Reagan came into office, from 10% to 20% of the wealth of the country. The general population has stagnated. 70% of the population in the United States tries to get by from one paycheck to the next with nothing in reserve. The United States is almost alone in the world in not having a health system, universal health system, which means that people, they can't even expect to, if they want to be tested for the virus, they have to pay for it. They can't. I mean, this is the richest country in history with absolutely unparalleled resources. It's been smashed by the neoliberal assault. And the same is true in Europe. That's why you see anger, resentment, contempt for institutions, and xenophobia, unwillingness, hatred of foreigners, unwillingness to accept the refugees that Europe and the United States should be accepting. All of these things are converging in ways that are going to be very hard to overcome. And they're all interconnected. Fortunately, you can make progress. Actually, there's, to move to some hopeful signs, there's a new international that is just being formed called the Progressive International. It's based on the Sanders movement in the United States, which is a huge popular movement that's trying to rescue the country from the curse of the neoliberal assault. A comparable movement, a counterpart in Europe called the M25, which is a transnational movement in Europe trying to salvage what makes sense in the European Union and overcome its severe flaws, bringing in voices from the global south, from South Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. Just had its first conference in Iceland, where the prime minister is a member. That offers considerable promise for a true international alliance of the kind that's needed to deal with international crises. Doesn't have the power of the states of the world, but it has the population of the world. Could be a difference. It's the human society is on a kind of a cusp. It's either going to destroy itself or it will move forward. And that decision is imminent next few years.
Yep, you have mentioned about Reagan, and these are incredibly insightful understanding about. Now, Bangladesh is fairly a new country. It gained independence only in 1971, and we often fail to contextualize America's attitude towards the independence struggle of Bangladesh. I'm specifically referring to the Nixon-Kissinger administration. At the time of the independence struggle, 1971, Nixon and Kissinger, they simply turned a blind eye to the brutal genocide that was taking place. And at that time, the American ambassador to Bangladesh, Arthur Blood, has expressed his dissent, political dissent, and said that the US government is turning a deafening silence to not looking at what is happening in Bangladesh. Nixon-Kissinger administration, they destroyed Arthur Blood's career as an ambassador. And I think it was one of the first kind where an ambassador has expressed his dissent in such strongly worded telegram, known as Blood Telegram. There's a wonderful book, it's called Blood Telegram by Professor Gary J. Bass. And subsequently, the tape was published where Nixon and Kissinger, their telephone conversation, how Nixon's racist, despicable racist attitude towards Indians, was published. How do we Bangladeshis relate to America's role in the independence of Bangladesh and how we relate to it now?
It was a hideous crime, and remember the reasons. Kissinger severely threatened India for daring to try to rescue people who were being massively slaughtered. What was the reason? Very simple. Kissinger was hoping to have a public relations triumph. He was secretly working with Pakistan to arrange a meeting in China to further détente. He wanted it to be secret so that when it occurred, it would be very exciting. He would be praised for his magnificent diplomatic achievement. And in order to preserve that public relations moment, he was willing to see millions of people slaughtered in what's now Bangladesh. It's, one of the most shocking moments of history. Not just the horrors that happened, but the reasons for it. He's now honored in the United States. It's not the only case. He is the author of probably the most extraordinary statement in the order, military order, in the archival record, when the Nixon administration decided to bomb Cambodia around the same time, 1970. Kissinger was given the order to tell the US Air Force to bomb Cambodia. And here are his words: massive bombing campaign in Cambodia, anything that flies against anything that moves. Anything that flies against anything that moves. I mean, you can't find that in the Nazi archives, literally. They did it. They devastated Cambodia. One of the things they did was create the Khmer Rouge. Hundreds of thousands of peasants bent on revenge. They took revenge, not on Kissinger, on the urban areas, with horrible atrocities for which we blame the Cambodians. Okay, it's easy, not ourselves. Unfortunately, the world is full of this. And one of the good things is, in the West, at least, there's a beginning of facing some of it. Like, take the George Floyd protests in the United States. They were, first of all, consider what happened. I mean, another black man was murdered by the police. Happens all too frequently. But this time was different. It led to a huge popular uprising, the biggest social movement in American history, which had enormous popular support. About 2/3 of the population supported it. That's higher than the support that Martin Luther King ever achieved. And it was black-white solidarity, people working together, positive programs. It didn't happen just like that. It happened from years of working to develop understanding, consciousness, willing to face the horrifying crimes of 400 years of vicious repression of the Afro-American population, stolen from their homelands, kidnapped, 10 millions died at sea, went into the most vicious system of slavery in human history, which is a large part of the basis of the wealth of the United States and Britain. Cotton was the oil of the 19th century, cheap cotton. Now, finally, after 400 years, the beginnings of facing what happened and leading to a strong white backlash. Trump's popular base is founded in ideals of white supremacy. We have to block the facing of this atrocity and block immigrants. That's the source of his support, primarily among men. His overwhelming support among men in white, rural, Christian, heavily armed, traditional America. That's a cancer that has to be wiped out. It's not going to be easy. There's similar things in Europe with the rise of the far right. A lot of it is the consequence of the neoliberal assault. One of the things that it did in the United States, and here we can blame not just Reagan, but Clinton, Bush, Obama, all of them, is it established an international order based on rights of investors, forgetting entirely the rights of working people. Take a look at the Global World Trade Organization. It's an investor rights agreement. Offers nothing to people. It's radically opposed to free markets. There are huge patent monopolies given that never existed in the past. If they had England and the United States wouldn't have developed. England robbed higher Indian technology to develop. The United States robbed higher British technology. That's the basis for their development. Now it's blocked. Economic history, it's called kicking away the ladder. First, you climb up the ladder by robbing others. Then you kick away the ladder so that they can't rise up. This means, one thing it means in the United States is that people can't afford drugs because the World Trade Organization provides patent rules which give the drug companies monopoly pricing rights so they can raise drugs to the stratosphere. A drug can cost 1,000 times as much as it would take to make a generic. Can't do it because of the investor rights agreements. The effect on the rest of the world is much worse. But what it means for the industrial heartland in the United States is destruction. And that leads to fear, anger, resentment, the rise of poisonous tendencies like white supremacy and racism and xenophobia. These things are all interconnected, and you have to dismantle all of them. It's a nexus of crimes that has to be taken apart. Can be done, but it's not going to be an easy task. And every part of the world has a role in it.
This is one of the things that dumbfounds me. I personally feel incredibly privileged to be born in a small village in Bangladesh and growing up in a rural community. Trying to understand how do we take people like Kissinger? How do we, like your essay, the roles of intellectuals have shaped the perception of many people who want to join in resistance. Kissinger was a professor at Harvard University. And when I think about, like you just have mentioned that the slavery, the cotton was the oil at that time. I taught economics for almost 20 years. And I think about it is that when I was teaching economics in high school to my students, I was teaching that the British curriculum, of course, is that the advantage of, market economy, all the good things, the structural adjustment policies bringing. And you see Nobel Prize winning economists like Milton Friedman saying that the economic progress of America had nothing to do with, slavery. It had nothing to do with, brutal exploitation of, colonialism. Instead, sort of like colonialism has done favor to parts of the world that was stagnant. We grew up reading scholars like Milton Friedman, or particularly Karl Marx. Help us, giving us some guideline that how do we approach this intellectual giants established in academic circles like Kissinger, a murderer, an architect of genocide. We read people like Milton Friedman. How do we approach these intellectual giants and look at them critically, not accepting what they're just saying, for its face value?
Well, first of all, we should be careful about the phrase intellectual giant. I'll tell you an anecdote. In the 1960s, before Kissinger had risen to great heights, he was a professor at Harvard, teaching foreign policy, international affairs. I was teaching undergraduate courses at MIT, right down the river from Harvard, courses on American history, international affairs, and so on, things I write about. I tried to use Kissinger's academic essays, not the ones he's famous for, the academic essays on American history. The undergraduate students at MIT were rolling in the aisles. They couldn't believe the stupidity of what he was writing. I had to stop using it. I'll give you the lead example. This is the great professor at Harvard. One of his articles, you can look it up in his book on American foreign policies back in the 1960s. He has an article called The Statesman and the Prophet. And what he argues is he's trying to look very deeply intellectual and so on. So he says the real problems of the world are not war and genocide and famine. Those are superficial problems. The real problem, he says, is a divide between the West and everyone else. The West underwent the Newtonian revolution and understands that there's a world independent of the person. The rest of the world hasn't understood this yet. So we are trying to send a message to the Vietnamese. We bomb them and tell them to let us take over, but they don't understand. They probably think it's a headache. They don't know that there's a world out there separate from them. You can't ask MIT students to read this, and they don't even think it's a comic strip. It's impossible. You have to be really brainwashed deeply to be able to read this and not break out in laughter and ridicule. The intellectual level is nothing very much. We're talking about very mediocre individuals who do understand power and know how to serve power and to work for it. Kissinger understands very well. He once made a comment about what are called policy intellectuals, the intellectuals who make it into the centers of power, give advice, and so on. He said their role is to translate the wishes of the powerful into actual policy. That's it. We're the servants who serve the powerful. We shine their shoes, and we take what they tell us and we turn it into something that can be applied. So if Nixon wants to bomb Cambodia, I send the order saying anything that flies against anything that moves. If Nixon wants to make a breakthrough with China and make it exciting, I decide to murder huge numbers of people in Bangladesh because that's what's important. And that's the role of the intellectual, according to Kissinger. He's not alone. Let's take Milton Friedman. In 1981, Milton Friedman wrote a very crucial article, which is one pillar of the neoliberal assault. Let's remember what was happening then. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher decided to shift. They didn't decide. The corporate sector decided and told them, we are going to shift the nature of the economy. There had been a kind of social democratic economic system which was working very successfully, but there was not enough profit. Workers were getting too militant. We had to change things. So then comes neoliberalism. What is it? Very simple. Reagan, in his inaugural address, announced the government is the problem, not the solution. What does that mean? It means we have to take decisions away from government, which is partially responsive to the population, and place them in private hands, private concentrated capital, the corporate sector, which is totally unaccountable to the public. So decisions have to go from the public domain to the private sector, which is unaccountable to the public. Now comes Milton Friedman. Right at that time, he wrote a very important article which set the stage for corporate governance through the neoliberal years. His article announced that the sole responsibility of a corporation is to maximize profit. It's not allowed to do anything else. Now remember, forming a corporate, if you and I decided to form a corporation, That's a gift from the public. You're getting a gift if you incorporate. You're getting the gift of limited liability. So if there's a crime by the corporation, I'm not responsible. That's a big gift. One of many gifts given by the public to corporations. But Friedman was saying, you don't have to pay anything back. You get the gifts and then you maximize profit. So put these three together. Get government out of decision making. Put it in the hands of private corporations whose sole goal is enriching themselves. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going to happen. Well, what you get is $47 trillion transferred from the working class and the middle class to the super rich. It's not quantum physics. It's right on the surface. That's Milton Friedman's contribution. Okay. Also highly honored, greatly honored, considered one of the great figures of the modern age. Now, these are real pathologies. And I'm afraid I have to leave to the next. I'm off to the Middle East for my next interview.
I just had one last question, that was asked by one of my professor from Bangladesh, a very respected, anthropologist, that both UK and USA are responding to COVID-19 in a neoliberal mode. People are dying every day. COVID-19 mostly kills people deemed to be burdened to the healthcare and of the welfare. What do you think about it, Professor Zahir Ahmed, one of the very respected anthropologists of Bangladesh?
Well, there's a few things to notice. One thing to notice is the deaths are needless. It is possible to stop them. We've seen it not far from you. East Asia, when China, on January 10th, Chinese scientists had identified the virus, sequenced the genome, sent it to the world. Every virologist in the world knew what they were facing. Some countries reacted, countries that cared enough about their citizens to react. Right on the border of China, South China, center of the epidemic, Vietnam had no deaths till very recently when there's a handful of visitors. No deaths right on the border of South China. South Korea had a serious pandemic, overcame it, never even had a lockdown. New Zealand has practically no deaths. Taiwan, under control. China itself, the center of the crisis, has it under control. The economy is now functioning. GDP increased by 5% last year. Almost every other country's in recession. Africa, which is not the richest place in the world, overcame it. They began to react immediately. Soon as the information came, the health ministers in Iraq, in in Africa, gathered, laid down plans. Countries like Senegal, Liberia, have almost no cases. Poor, backward countries. The rich countries can't do it. It's not because of lack of resources, lack of information. It's because of social and political pathologies. Back to the crisis, yes, it can be overcome. Now just take a look at the number of deaths. There's 3 countries way in the lead in the number of deaths. United States, India, Brazil. Each of them is in the hands of an autocratic proto-fascist. I don't think that's an accident. Way behind them in 4th place is Russia, also not exactly a stellar democracy. Then down later you get others. There's things that are happening that are under control. The pandemic is severe. It can be controlled. We've seen it. The deaths are needless. The rich countries could do what they can do in Africa, in Vietnam, in Cuba, in New Zealand as it can be done.
Yeah, Professor Chomsky, we have one last question, which is personal question to you. Is that, for Bangladeshi students, young students in Bangladesh, what would be, Bashar Assad was asked this question that if in the future, let's say 100 years down the road, people see this interview, what would you like to tell to them? Question to you, Professor Chomsky. What is your message to the future?
My message is very simple. We're in a unique moment of history. It's never happened before, with a confluence of severe crises. If they are not dealt with effectively, the future of human society is very dark. It's unlikely to survive very long. But we have answers. Every single question has an answer. And it's been given. Like the pandemic, the answer's been given by very poor countries lacking in resources, but having social cohesion and serious policies. Global warming is an existential crisis. The means to deal with it are feasible, have been worked out in detail, very persuasively, can easily be handled within the means available. Nuclear war can be ended, the threat, by easy means. The destruction of democracy can be reversed. Every crisis we face can be overcome. It's not going to happen by magic. It's going to be take the dedicated engagement on an international level. All of these crises are international. They have to be dealt with by a world community that's committed to it. That can be achieved, but it's going to be a major struggle.
Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky, to take us some time in the midst of your very busy schedule. We look forward to have future conversations with you. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.